and welcome to another episode of Laying Down the Lore 40K, a lore podcast in which we aim to separate our Drukhari from our Dark Angels, our Tyranids from our Tau, and our Craft Worlds from our Chaos Marines, and generally ask, what's up with this Warhammer 40K stuff? My name is Ben Crone Barber, and I know pretty much fuck all about 40K. With me is my co-host, Christopher Crowlin Allen.
This is my last show.
Who is all business today, guys. He is all business. Who knows absolutely fuck all about 40K.
Yeah.
And my dear brother Darren.
Go fuck yourselves.
Who is also all business today. Who knows so much about 40K it's a wonder he has time to do anything else. Over the years, this dichotomy between our levels of understanding became clear, and this series is an attempt to address that ignorance.
Morning, lads.
Were you both sincere in those statements?
I said what I mean, and I meant what I said.
And Dar, everyone is to go fuck themselves.
But in a nice way, in a kind of consensual,
the good way.
You're not by yourself way. Yeah.
Right.
Not
Slanesh way.
Go. Okay, I suppose. Go make love to yourselves. All right. So
go forth and
a more tender.
Whoa. Kral hasn't smiled or he's dispensed with all pleasantries this morning.
Mate, I've been up all night because I had a spider land on me last night as I was falling asleep. You know when you just like it happens, and the spider just like crawled on me. And I go, so panicked. Switched on all the lights. That got my adrenaline going. I was awake for the next hour, just trying to find this fucking spider. Couldn't find it. So all night I was like on the cusp of falling asleep, and then waking up, going, the spider.
and what it was Amy. Like that on the back of your neck.
It was my 8-legged fiance. Yeah,
she was in her night form.
I can remember when I was living in Ireland, just like yourself, falling off to sleep, and then I felt a spider run down my beard. Yeah. And that's when I realized I actually have such exquisite control of my body, I can slam all my orifices closed.
And that's when I realized sleeping outside is a bad idea.
That's when I realized that Spiderland, the bed and mattress company, isn't all that
great. Excellent.
So the logical thing was burn the house down.
Yeah. It's theirs now.
Well, I slept wonderfully. Sans spiders. So,
you slept with a French spider.
I slept with a French spider, which I think is a great segue to the support section. So
send us your spiders,
everyone who. Big thanks to everyone that supports the show. You guys are great.
No, you're not.
If you would like to support us, ignore him. There's a number of ways that you can do that. You can head over to Patreon, where you can sign up for our Discord for just £3 a month, or you can pay an extra £2 and gain access to our new bonus show. I wonder how long we can keep saying it's a new bonus show. 40KO'd, which is just
the new episodes.
There are new episodes.
The regular new episodes. So
new episodes of 40KO # Spider Podcast.
Spider Podcast, yeah. Spider Pig. We also have merchandise and links to our affiliates if you're into the hobby. So just hit the Quartermaster link in the description and bam, spiders. Also, before I forget, this episode may include some ads, which help us create more content for free. So the easiest way to support us is just by letting them play fully and maybe go and buy whatever it is that they're selling from spiderland.com.
Yeah, and take an opportunity to sit down and think about what you've done.
Like Kral has done. He's just left.
Yeah, Kral's just left.
He's in the scullery, people. He's closing the door because he's still shitting himself.
There are not enough doors in the world to close.
Right, Kral, dispense with your spider fear, and you know what time is.
Citizen of the Imperium, it's time for frontal lobotomy or bottle in front of me.
Hey. I'm going to be contrarian. I'm going to be contrarian this episode, and I think, do you know what? She's rubbish.
Why?
That's the worst thing that you've ever said. How dare you?
It is, though. I actually, as soon as I said it, I felt terrible.
Yeah, what's wrong with you?
Of course he did.
I don't know. I don't know what a suitable punishment is.
She is a champ. She is an absolute saint. Who hopefully her and her family are coming to visit in the UK next year. So we might get to meet them.
Why?
Great.
If Michael allows that. What do you mean? Why?
Why, Michael? Why would you do
I think
that?
Michael was the first person that ever signed up for our Patreon.
He
Like,
was,
he
yeah.
was-
He's our,
he was
our
literally
first
supporting
ever
one.
fan. Yeah.
Our first ever fan. So big up.
He's playing the long game. He's actually a spider rancher.
That sounds like a shit candy.
It does sound like a shit candy or an amazing ranch.
But a really small one.
Worst ranch ever.
It needs to be at least 3 times this size.
This is a ranch for ant spiders.
So, Crow,
Yes, mate.
I literally only have one question for you. What did we cover last episode?
Tau.
Well done, man. I'm
100%.
going to have to give you a point because, it's 100%. That is 100%.
Mate,
but
absolutely.
I don't have any
We
questions.
continued our dive into the Tau, started with an exploration of all 6 spheres of expansion, together with some of the hijinks that ensued and the impact of the Tau goddess
What's
on
happening?
a certain Death Guard army, the fate of the 4th expansion's fleet, and the liberation of the Startide Nexus, Ben. We then...
What is
took a
happening?
brief
You're
look
ruining
at
this.
The supreme ethereal Onvar.
Dar, stop him
Onvar,
and ask him some questions.
and its
before
manipulative
before
and
he reads
deceitful
all of the
ways
answers.
before moving into the mysteriously long-lived rebel of the Tau Empire, Commander Farsight. I wonder if he was short-sighted. We look at the establishment of the Farsight enclaves and the anti-ethereal stance. We close out the episode with a brief rundown of the units available to the Tau players on the tabletop, including the best stingwings of the Tau Empire. Turns out I'm not such a fan of the Tau after all. Is what Darren wrote. In the
Is what Darren wrote, yeah. Right. So off the top of my head then, question number 1.
Yeah.
How many
did-
spheres of expansion were there?
How many spheres of expansion were there, Crow?
923,579.
You literally said it in the intro, you tool.
Don't read it
Yeah,
again.
I know.
Don't
I'm
look your
busting
eyes
your
down.
chops, Darren.
How many?
6 plus 7,900. Yeah. Okay.
Okay,
Yeah, go.
I'm going to give him
Yeah.
none for that because he cheated. Why do the Ethereals hate Farsight?
Why? Why not?
Yeah.
You gotta hate someone.
Well, they're both Tau Crow. Why are they hating?
Let's read the blurb. We take everything the soup.
It's not in the blurb, you dick.
I'm just wondering how many times I can read this short summary to try and extract the answer that you need. I don't know. I don't know. The Farsight did something untoward to them, didn't they?
Yeah,
That's
do you
what
not remember, like, during a battle, he basically, there was a warp incursion. A bunch of demons came in and started attacking them while they were fighting. Who were they fighting?
Standard day in Warhammer 40K, isn't it?
Orcs.
They were fighting orcs. And then
Orcs.
Farsight suddenly had a glimpse of the warp and understood that the Ethereals had been hiding stuff. So he seceded, I think is the correct term, from the
He did,
Tau.
yeah.
And
He's
then
a
the Tau were like-
secessionist.
He's a secessionist, yeah. It's very similar to a saxophonist, but it's slightly less musical.
Yeah, you're a suxophoist, mate.
Saxophonist. Right, Carl, you're having nothing for that. One final question, because Randall has failed us. Well done, Randall. Actually, I'm not sure if we covered it in the last episode. It might have been the previous one, but I'm going to do it anyway. What is the biggest mech suit that they have?
I can picture it. I can feel it. I can smell it. I don't know what its name
I can
is.
taste it.
I can
Spiders!
fucking taste it, bruh. Yeah. Towertron. Junk, junk, junk.
It's when a load of smaller suits combine to make a bigger suit.
Exactly. Yeah. No idea, buddy. Go on.
It's the supremacy armor.
That's exactly what I was going to say because I googled it. Yes, it's the supremacy armor.
The armor of
Well.
supremacy.
3 big, massive artillery guns on its back, like pointed
With a
towards
suit
the enemy,
attached
not
to it.
like as a jetpack. That'd be weird.
Yeah. I use it to eat my soup.
What computer game was there where you could do a rocket launcher assisted jump? I seem to remember
there's
some
been a
game
few
where
of
you could
those.
do that.
I think some of the Call of Duties introduced that. Titanfall, that was good. Did you ever play Titanfall? You were like
I've never played. What's Titanfall?
First-person shooter, but you could also pilot big mechs, and
cool.
they had kind of jump packs as well. That was a really good game, actually. I really like that.
It was a drop site, wasn't it? Like when you die, you then regenerate in the spaceship, and then you drop down onto the planet side.
God, that's handy, isn't it? That'd be great in real life. No, you do the fucking shopping this week.
Is that the game you were referring to? No?
No, I've not. I think it was one of these Doom or similar style games.
Yeah. There's a few first-person shooters with jetpack. Fun. Yeah.
Well, Crowell, the question spreadsheet seems to be having a little bit of a moment to itself, but you've got
God, we're on fire today.
What I'm hearing is I was too correct.
Well, you've had 5 right out of the last 12 questions, so just over.
So I'm doing pretty well.
Yeah, let's call it pretty well. You're about a third of what you need to be to keep that incredible frontal lobe of yours.
Okay, cool. It's a pretty fine frontal lobe.
I've seen some lobes in my time.
If I may say so myself. What does the frontal lobe do? Is that memory or like motor skills?
Personality, isn't it? Or
I thought it was like the brain equivalent of an airbag when you smack it when you go headbanging. I mean, that's what I've always used it for.
Yeah, it's because that's what is it trepanning? That's why they would do that, and that was always at the front, wasn't it?
Isn't that
donk?
Isn't that sifting for gold?
Trepanning.
Oh, tray panning. All right, yes, trepanning.
That was awful.
Spider on your neck, there, Chris.
Okay, well, that was a total disaster. Let's see how the rest of the episode goes.
For no reason whatsoever. No. Darren, rate this dad joke. I was walking on the beach the other day and saw a man pulling a clam on a leash. I thought it must be hard walking on the beach with a pulled muscle.
That's a solid joke.
It's all right, isn't it? It's all right.
That's nice. Really good.
That's all right, isn't it? I'd give that a 6, maybe a 7 out of 10.
Yeah, no, that's 10. That's an 8. If you slip that in at a dinner party, that's an 8.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, there's a brief window. I don't get invited to dinner parties anymore, but there's a brief window that would kill at a dinner party.
That's because you only speak in dad jokes.
But it's only one. I only ever tell.
Could you reframe that as a dad joke, please?
Right, Dar, take us away.
Right, welcome.
Awful.
Welcome, dear listeners, to our final episode of the introduction. It's taken us 32, 33 episodes 32. Just to cover all the factions in the very highest possible level. Which I think is, we originally had it planned as 12. I say we. I had it originally planned as 12, and it became...
Kral had it planned as 12.
What happened?
Where we've effectively trebled the length of the intro.
Dar realized it was 12 episodes, but each episode was 7 hours long. So and we simply don't have the capacity to.
It was effectively a Club 1830 holiday of audio.
Wow, you've really stretched that intro thinly, haven't you? You are the messiah of Warhammer 40K intros, making 12 episodes last well over 30.
Are you saying that this isn't a 2-part Jackson?
This is not a 2-part Jackson because there is not enough. It's a faction that has not had the attention that the other factions have had previously. Right. There's not been enough novels written about them. There's not been enough iterations of their their army book
The anticipation is killing Growl.
So this was
He's
a
just
faction.
so strung out.
This
No sleep and spider fear.
spider sleep. That's what we're going to call it. That's the
Chris,
condition.
look behind you, spider pig.
Right. So this final faction appeared at the dawn of Warhammer 40K and lasted for 2 editions, and then died a death, and then was hinted again in the 6th edition, and then began to return via the game Necromunda, for which they have since expanded that faction. And then in 9th edition, they came back with a roar. That's more a thing. Chris, can you guess who they are?
It's gotta be dwarves. Space dwarves. Space
dwarves. So we're going to approach the dwarves in
quietly.
We're going to approach the dwarves in 3 phases.
Casablanca.
Marco Polo.
Pineapples. So we're going to have a look at the squats as was, which is how the space dwarves were referred to. Not originally. Originally, they were packaged as space dwarves. That was literally what the logo was for them. So we'll have a look at the squats, then we'll have a look at their kind of fading, and then we'll have a look at their return and the different kind of formats and shapes their cultures took. So if you're familiar with the dwarves from Warhammer Fantasy Battle or Warhammer the Old World or Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, you are already familiar with 50% of their culture as squats, as the space
Not
dwarves.
overly familiar, just a normal amount of familiar.
More an acquaintance level familiarity.
Yeah. Okay.
So friendly, not familiar.
Yeah. Okay.
So their origins, much like the elves and the orcs, was they were just simply copied and pasted across from Warhammer Fantasy in the 1st edition, and they were then spacified, and they were classed as being an abhuman race. So they were Homo sapiens rotundus. So they were, round humans is effectively.
Rotundus.
Rotundus, yes. That was their classification by the Imperium. So they are of human origins, but just on higher than normal gravity worlds is where their cultures kind of gestated, I suppose. So they appear in the Rogue Trader rulebook from 1987. And they did not get their full army list outside of the Book of the Astronomicon, of course, which is a army list supplement, but it's an army list you need a degree in maths and engineering to kind of compile a functioning army, because it deals a lot in like fractional points, which is not helpful if you're trying to sit down to get a quick game in. Their first army list appeared roughly a year after 40k was released in White Dwarf 111. And their kind of cultures were broken into broadly 2 main kind of subcultures. So you had Dwarven holds, very much like the Dwarven holds of Warhammer Fantasy. So, all the Karaks and the Karazes. It's that kind of
upside down pyramids.
That exactly right. And each one comprised of one broad kind of family unit, like a clan or a house. But there were divisions within sort of brotherhoods. Now, brotherhoods are like battalion or regimental sized armies. But they are the family kind of, the closer knit family and extended family units of the squat holds. These were then accompanied by the engineering guilds, or it's just referred to as the guild. And so guilds would be, well, they're broadly the engineers and the blacksmiths and the forgers of the squat worlds. And they are, on the tabletop, they were represented as bikers. There were Hell's Angels, dwarves, on bikes and trikes.
Amazing.
And so the bikes looked like these kind of big kind of chopper, with the really extended front fork. So the dwarves would be kind of back of it like that. And they'd have like a pair of bolt guns strapped onto the headlights so they could shoot as they're riding into battle. And then
bad to the bone.
Yeah, exactly right.
Bad to the bone.
But their support weapons were heavy weapons mounted on big, huge motorized trikes. And so you'd have one driver and a guy standing on a very narrow platform at the back with a heavy weapon on a I suppose a gimbal arm, maybe.
Yeah.
And so you could have
a mount of some sort.
Exactly right. So you'd have these trikes that had like heavy plasma guns and multi-melters and heavy bolters and stuff on them, so you could gun down your enemies as your units of bikers were racing towards, well, the gun down enemies, I suppose, to run them over. To kind of underscore where the squats sat within relation to the Imperium, you used to be able to get human advisors. These would be commissars from the Astra Militarum, or Imperial Guard as was, who would join and connect with the chieftain. It would be someone who'd a miniature kind of advisor to that chieftain and would be on the battlefield. You also had representatives of the Adeptus Mechanicus, but it was a squat in kind of power armor with the axes and the pistols and what have you.
So a squat mechanicum?
Yes.
That's cool.
A mech priest, an engine seer, I suppose.
Would he still have she? Are there female squats?
There are, yes, of course.
Yeah, so
other genders are available.
Would they worship the Omnissiah as well? Like, would they be very much integrated into the Mechanicum way of being?
They'd be integrated quite a bit into the Mechanicum being, but the dwarves have the squats. Now I'm being very careful here, because so the squats were pre-destruction. So the squats had ancestor gods, again like the fantasy equivalents, but they did recognize the emperor as the head of the Imperium. They were very gruff when people started calling him, a god. That's not who the squats had as their kind of primary deities or what have you.
Right.
The knowledge of the squats was held by the living ancestors. These were the oldest squats within a given hold. And the kind of rule of thumb was, once you reached 300 or 400 years old, you would then become functionally immortal, but you'd grow more decrepit over time. And there's
it's a rough deal.
Like a fate worse than death.
Yeah.
But they're squats, so they kind of face up to it with a kind of
a vigor.
I was going to say stability.
Spunk.
Well, spunk, yes. Spiders. So
Ben, reminders of the age groups of different dwarves. I don't know if this applies to 40K.
Oh, that's a good question.
Look, remember
Grumnir? No. Grumney? Is that
beardlings?
Beardlings.
Nubby stubble.
Nubby
stubbles.
There you go.
Yes.
Hey.
So these were the names of the kind of age groups of fantasy dwarfs, and they got
infants,
as they got older, their
middle-aged.
Their beards were a big part of their kind of not only their personality but their kind of age and development as an individual. Is that the same with the squats?
That was the same with the squats as well. Great pride was taken in their beards, and
even in their like Cosmo suits. So they'll just be like in there, and they just have like
just wrapped around their head.
Yeah, their face will be, their vision will be obscured by just this big floofy beard in front of the visor.
just literally at eye level, so they can just see over the top of it.
Just like,
what do you see, John? Well, everything looks fucking hairy, dude. Like it looks pretty hairy out there, man. Or the helmet just has a big extension for the beard, like just a fucking massive long plume. Like.
So with the squats, a lot of their artillery and a lot of their vehicles were simply vehicles of the Imperium. So they could take land raiders, they could take rhino personal transports. They had thud guns.
Were they modified?
No. They were just the standard STC constructs.
So they had to just take a load of phone books with them so that they could get to the right height of the controls.
Well, I mean, there was a lot of
in the
standing.
Seat.
Yeah, there was a lot of standing.
Yeah, just remove the seats entirely and we'll stand.
I used to do a thing called transit surfing. Have I ever told you this?
No.
In Ireland, when I went on a few digs after I left school, and down the kind of country roads in Ireland, the drivers would go pretty fast. And so what we do is we'd stand up in the back of the transit van and see how long we could stay standing for as it bounced through rural Ireland. Yeah,
many collarbones were broken.
Oh, yes, yeah. Indeed.
Yeah, that was the classic fracture in school, wasn't it? The fractured collarbone. That seemed to be the one when you were a little kid that always happened for some reason.
Yeah.
Oh, I was walking and I broke my collarbone.
Yeah, just go for the collarbone. It's his weak point. He's underdeveloped.
So I'm going to share a couple of pictures here and give you an idea of what the squats were represented as. So that gives you an idea of the aesthetic and kind of broadly the type of culture they had.
That guy, the two images that you sent, the second one, the bottom right, that guy's beard looks like he's just fucking touched mains electricity, or someone's rubbed like a couple of balloons against him, and like his beard's just gone whoop, like,
in the bottom right.
Yeah, he's amazing. Well, that's the effect of like squat rage.
Yeah, he's got anger beard. You never had anger beard before?
Anti-gravity beard.
So, with relation to the squats, they divide up their history into ages. The age of founding, their very first age, was roughly in the year 20,000 to 25,000 in terms
a mere
of
5,000 years.
Yes, so sorry, I'm going to have to do that again because my language is all over the place. So the age of founding, their very first age, where they left Earth and traveled through colony ships and moved into the galactic core, which is an area of space that is largely uninhabited or certainly not covered at all in any of the lore outside of squats as to what might be there, what beings are there, what resources are there any empires, is there a cure for chaos? Who knows? We don't know because the galactic core has remained largely unexplored within the lore. Both of you got your hands up. Go.
Let's ask the question simultaneously. Ready? After 3. 1, 2, 3. Who did the Dwarves align with? Are they independent, or did they align with the Imperium?
Right. Okay, Chris. they are there. How would you describe it? They're with the Imperium, but not of the Imperium. So they are recognized. They're a recognized stable mutation of the human genome. They are loyal warriors, frequently hire themselves out as mercenaries to Imperial forces. And the presence of the various types of advisors kind of keeps them in the fold of the Imperium, but they have their own cultures, their own planets, their own wants and needs. So they don't tie themselves particularly to the Imperium outside of a kind of general alliance. Ben, what was your question? Because you got quiet mouth.
Oh, sorry. Is the galactic core basically does it still exist in the 41st millennium, or is that covered now by the Great Rift?
A big chunk of it is covered in the Great Rift, but the galactic core still exists. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Quick follow-up question: when the dwarves left Earth, were they, dwarves of that we would have in our real world? Is that
no? They were the standard human genome. They were humans as we would understand them. So, like I was going to say, like you and me, maybe better.
Better,
better versions
like
of
us, but.
Yeah.
Kral's kind of halfway there, isn't he? He's
I'm just moving on with your casual racism. So they.
Thanks,
I was talking about his height.
What, halfway to being a squat? Whoa!
Yeah. Whoa!
You're like a squid.
That does feel like a racial slur. It really does.
I'm a living joke.
We love you for it, mate.
The very first colonies they set up were mining worlds because they could not rely, given the speeds that they could travel at, they could not rely on resupply from Earth. And so they began creating their own, or the seeds of their own unique culture were sown through that kind of sense of self-reliance. And then everything changed when chaos and isolation took over the galaxy. And so this was the great kind of fall of human culture, the Great Isolation, the Age of Isolation, as it's called, saw the homeworlds of the squats cut off from Terra by the kind of galactic phenomena of warp storms that were happening during that time. Many of the holds were lost, and those systems that were nearby each other formed alliances called leagues. So very much like extended allied family groupings or cultural groupings. And many of those systems fortified their largest kind of planet or planets as the homeworlds. And over the next handful of thousands of years, that's when they developed the kind of unique elements of their technology, and the kind of guild then became the Hell's Angel guilds became very kind of important for knowledge transfer and scientific understanding and advancement. And it's that period more than any other that saw a growth, somewhat ironically, in their reduction in size, but also their kind of stick-to-itiveness, their resilience, and their self-sustainability. Dwarvenness. Their dwarvenness.
Yeah. So do they have the same kind of resilience, like physical resilience that the fantasy dwarves have then? Right.
Yeah.
Right. Is that the same with regards to, say, the magic of Zeech or
Yes, that kind of
water off a duck's back. Like magic off a Votann's back.
Quack.
like magic off a dwarf's back. Wait, I've seen that movie. They then, after the Age of Isolation kind of draws to a close, they emerge from their homeworlds and their leagues, and they begin encountering other races within the galaxy. And although a kind of initial conflicts and misunderstandings happened, much like our Necron friends when they encountered other races, they led sort of kind of a beneficial trade relationship style alliance occurred with not only the Eldar, but the Orcs as well. So there were, very briefly, trading partners with those other cultures.
How did they trade with the Orcs?
It's a solid question, Ben. What they did was they exchanged the kind of mineral resources they kind of extracted from the planets and asteroids and other stellar phenomenon in the galactic core and traded them on then for things such as more advanced technologies, supplies, food, and the teeth to eat them with. And, of course, weapons. They remained steadfastly neutral. Tell my wife hello. And so on. And so they saw quite significant technological advancements during that phase as the guilds got hold of kind of Eldar technology and Orc technology that they couldn't really understand how it works because they didn't believe it worked, so it didn't work. And then we see the rise of the kind of huge hydroponic farming systems within these great strongholds within the Dwarven Holds, thus kind of completing their transformation into space fantasy dwarves. So completely self-reliant. They have, they do have trade alliances, but they can go for decades, if not centuries, without needing any input from external cultures. So that age of trade lasted roughly 3,000 years before a brutal orc invasion. Are there any other kinds? But a brutal orc invasion led by warlord Grunhag the Flayer. That's a Ronseal name if ever there was one. You imagine his battle wagon has lots of kind of
grunhagging all over the place. Yeah, man.
Yeah, man. The Squats called for aid, and the Eldar steadfastly ignored them and did not come to their defense as the Squats fought so viciously against the Orcs, but they suffered really heavy losses. And thusly, this was known as the Age of Wars. And it cemented their deep cultural resentments towards not only the Eldar, but especially the Orcs, because it was the Orcs that depopulated the Squat homeworlds to a great degree. So again, we're seeing not only are they culturally very similar to fantasy dwarves, but their numbers now reflect that kind of idea of a fading race.
Right, okay.
You know, not as much so as the Eldar or Eldari, but the kind of similar vein. Mr. Ben.
Were they not just like, dude, what are you doing, Mr. Greenskin? I was literally just trading with you a moment ago. Why the sudden change of heart?
Well, that assumes that you can have a rational conversation with an orc who's in a full wah.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so a drugged up orc.
Yeah.
Yeah, all right.
So this is where we also see a greater reliance on the Imperium. Reliance is perhaps too strong a word. A greater inclusion of the Imperium in the lives of the Squats, as was written in the Rogue Trader rulebook. Even to this day, expeditions are seeking out lost strongholds within the galactic core and the surrounding systems, joined sometimes by the Adeptus Mechanicus, who are keen to recover Squat technology, because the later colony ships that were sent out did include STCs. And we'll remember that is the most useful of sexually transmitted diseases.
ST Kralls.
Sexually transmitted Kralin.
That's how I was born.
I know what I'm going to call your kids.
I'm not having kids.
Because of that comment.
Because of that comment, yeah, exactly.
After the wedding, Chris, you'll realize that's not your decision. So we now march boldly into what's referred to as the Age of Rediscovery, which is a very kind of recent phase of squat history where they're reconnecting a lot of not only lost squat holds, be very careful saying that, but also the kind of scattered human worlds that are in and around the galactic core from this kind of great, huge expansion out into space. So they are still rediscovering human-populated planets and pulling them into the embrace of the Imperium. But the dwarves who have kind of developed this, I'm going to say unique, but in quotes, because, it's not unique, it's fantasy. Unique culture are now moving throughout the galaxy, settling really harsh environed planets, especially minerally rich worlds, much like their own home worlds. And where they go, invariably the Imperium follows. So they're very much like a rogue trader-esque mining concern as they go through the galaxy.
Rangers lead the way.
So the final age is the current one. Again, this is all pre-second edition. The squat homeworlds, while they are part of the Imperium, maintain political autonomy. So they're governed by local squat leagues and strongholds rather than by the Adeptus Terra or the Administratum, as it's referred to. They are fiercely independent, have managed to negotiate staggering treaties allowing self-governance of their own planets and their cultures in exchange for military aid. So they are, when squats go to war, either as mercenaries or as attached regiments to the Imperial Guard, they're doing so to fulfill their kind of racial contract to keep themselves autonomous and independent of the kind of whims and kind of grinding gears of the Adeptus Terra. And of course, they also share all this technology they uncover with the Adeptus Mechanicus. So they're a huge source of, I was going to say advancement, but rediscovery of lost technologies with the Mechanicum.
iPhone 1s, Tamagotchis.
Yep.
Pogs.
Weaponized Tamagotchis.
Mighty Max.
And so they very much reflect this notion of fantasy dwarf, the kind of broader fantasy dwarves, not just Warhammer fantasy dwarves. They fiercely defend their clan honor, their family honor at every turn. And so the entire thing is a reflection of their cultural unity, I suppose. They are a sub-race of humans that have managed to gain not only recognition, but independence, and are of use to the Imperium to such an extent that they're broadly left alone by the ecclesiarchy or the Adeptus Terra. And they've developed that kind of independent culture over 20,000 years. Yeah.
So cool.
Blimey.
Love them.
Blimey. Do they still have, what's her name? Beer and Baby Goddess. Mother of the Year.
Valia.
Probably.
Yeah, is their pantheon the same?
It will largely be the same, yes.
Grungni, Grimnir, and Valia, wasn't it? The sisters and brothers.
That sounds like a trio of painkillers you'd have to take, doesn't it?
Yeah, man.
I'm on the Grimnirs tonight. Oh, my back's at me.
Take 1 Grimnir now and 3 later.
Why is Grimnir a suppository? What?
In that picture that you sent, the guys in the kind of the background just next to the tanks look like a kind of ragtag sort of like Predator film kind of style, like the Catachan Jungle Fighters. They look like
Catachan Jungle Fighters, mate.
Yeah, you have to say it in the right accent, then.
Yeah, but they're all Yorkshire for some reason. I don't know why.
Yeah. There's trouble in jungle.
He bag them. Are they a specific type of? Is that a specific type of unit?
That is that's a collection of dwarf warriors or squat warriors. That's the basic military unit. I think I've got some other images. I've got tons of images of this because I just love the aesthetics they used to have.
The guy in the background looks like he's got like a Sherlock Holmes hat on. You know, the one with the cover on the ears and then the peak at the front.
Oh yeah,
like a hunting hat. What a ledge!
A deer stalker.
There you go, one. Deer stalker hat. Yeah,
but it's an orc stalker.
An orc stalker.
An orc.
So that is a kind of close-up color image of squat warriors as well.
Cool.
Yeah, they're quite vibrant, aren't they?
Yeah. You're only saying that because this picture's got colour. the ones in the black and white picture are probably vibrant as well.
The one on the top right reminds me of Darren, maybe a bit younger with brown hair.
Yeah.
We should superimpose our faces over that. Darren in the top right, Ben in the bold guy at the back.
With the glasses. Yeah.
I can be just to the right of Ben.
I love the guy at the top. He looks like he's just found a bolter on the battlefield, and he's barely able to carry
it. This fall, coming to a cinema near you, Thorm Grimson is a mining drill operator with a promising career ahead of him. Only problem is, he's about to be magically transformed into a duck. In the comedy critics are saying will really quack you up, Thorm Grimson stars in Magic Off a Dwarf's Back, rated PG-13.
We should mention perhaps that within this original timeline, there were squat holds that fell to chaos during the Horus Heresy. So squat warriors appeared on both sides of the Horus Heresy. Again, original timeline. And while many of these corrupted dwarf warriors were retreated to the Eye of Terror, there are still rumors of corrupted squat raiders and pirates scattered kind of throughout the Imperium. And some even speculate that there are entire lost strongholds isolated during the, Age of Isolation, I suppose, that may still exist, and their inhabitants are quite heavily mutated and occasionally go out raiding to get what they need to continue to survive. Now, we should say that in this original form, and the army list was, as I say, White Dwarf 111, you did have miniatures for pretty much every aspect of their army list. That includes Chaos squats. There used to be Chaos squat miniatures. So, I mean, there was only a handful of them. Like, literally, I think there was 5 or 6 kind of mutated normal warrior kind of level guys. And then you had a load of squats in power armor, which were, they'd be like the bodyguards or the champions and such. But then you had the exo-armored squats. And in both the normal flavored squat and the chaos squat, these looked like angry walking eggs with leering faces and guns and axes.
Excellent.
I think we've shown images of those before, but I'll make sure to stick some in the show notes of the exo. So that's the Terminator squats, which sounds like that's after a jippy tummy. You'd have a case of the Terminator squats.
I'll be back. Darren, a question about the strength and capabilities of the different units. So let's compare it to the Imperium. So do you have equivalent Space Marine squats in terms of strength, power, and capabilities? And up to which level? I'm going to guess that you certainly don't have anything up to the custody level of
not at all
capability.
What you're really looking at is slightly tougher Imperial Guard. That's what you're dealing with.
Okay.
You're dealing with human soldiers with 1 toughness better. That's the kind of standard Warhammer dwarf, I think, but have more kind of willpower and courage.
Okay.
What about with the exo suit?
You'd be looking at halfway between a human and a space marine for the level of power that would have, because the only ones that have access to the exo armor are Hearthguard champions. That's the bodyguard of the chieftain and the chieftain himself. So these are champion to hero level characters, and thus would be somewhere between a human champion and a space marine champion. Go ahead.
So it sounds like on the tabletop game, the squats are pretty not a very powerful army to play. Although it's points based, isn't it? So I imagine you'd have a load more squats than you would a bunch of space marines, for example.
So with the squats, you had the warrior squads were fairly resilient. They could get onto an objective and hold it. One of the benefits of the squat warriors is you could replace all of the las guns on 1 or 2 squads. And the squad size was 7 or 10, I can't remember exactly, with heavy bolters. So you could have effectively kind of real heavy machine gun emplaced squats where you're just pouring on something like 20 to 30 dice worth of hits per turn.
Hell. That's amazing. Did they shoulder mount the heavy bolters?
Shoulder mounted heavy bolters on squats. Yeah.
Fun.
And then you had access to robots, the same as the Imperium. So you could have siege robots walking around the table, destroying usually armor.
Getting in the way.
So tanks, getting in the way, tripping, falling over. Always top heavy. All the dwarf robots were top heavy.
When you say robots, what do you mean? Are they like I was going to say manned, dwarfed? Are they squatted?
They're actual robots with programs. So it's big battle robots. Yeah,
right. What's the? I thought AI was verboten.
They're not AI. It's robots that they only react to external stimuli. So you had to put in
MS-DOS.
Yes, that kind of idea. You actually had a flow chart. You had to design a flow chart for the game of what your robot would do if, you'd say, they were called battle
if
programs.
If that, then this kind of thing.
Yeah, if that, then this, yeah. Right, and so it's things like if there's an enemy in charge, if not, if there's an enemy in, shooting range, shoot, yeah.
Yeah. Just hang out.
If in doubt, panic.
What's the Imperium version of that, then?
It was the same. At that time, they were the Imperium's robots, yeah.
Cool. All right, okay.
They look pretty non-threatening.
They look pretty robot-y.
Are they like human-sized, 6 foot or so? Or are they massive?
They're about 10 feet tall, yeah.
Oh, okay, cool.
I think they're on 40 mil bases, which is the same size as an ogrin.
Ah, okay.
Because I was going to say the fauna, the rock and the scenery make them look like human-sized.
Yeah. But they're big rocks and big fauna, Kral.
Got it. Okay.
Zoom out, mate.
You're a big rock and a fauna.
Thank you.
What? The guy on the left with the red looks like he's just got 2 fleshy pulps as arms.
With faces on the end of it.
With faces on the end. What the fuck is that all about?
I think those are power fists.
It's a thalidomide robot.
Behold my power faces on the end of my fists.
My power faces. No, those are the same as if you see the guy in the center, or as you're looking at it, the arm on the right of the black robot. It's
got a little Jeremy Beadle hand.
Yeah. I
don't know if that's appropriate to laugh at, but I'm laughing at it. It's getting a laugh.
I'm committing to the laugh. Ma.
Also, I think I saw Jeremy Beadle in that last image that Dar put up, the colourful one.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure.
And the mech on the right, his as you look at it, his right arm, he's just got a spanner for an arm. Like proper Futurama design type robot.
Yeah.
And so on. So squat society as a whole really is much like a vast collection of city-states. So each hold or stronghold is led by a hereditary chieftain or lord, and the Hearthguard, who are the kind of noble aristocracy, the warrior aristocracy, are advisors and leaders and bodyguards and appear on the tabletop in that same role. These strongholds each joined leagues, which are the larger kind of social structures for defense and trade. And they did vary in size, and, from a handful of holds to, many tens, if not hundreds of holds, governed then by councils formed of the various lords or ambassadors from those holds. And though each league lacked kind of an overarching structure, social structure, they maintained communication and kind of unified very quickly in times of war. So it's a decentralized but cooperative social structure that gave squats, gave their society as much resilience as the squats themselves, and allowed them to manage their own affairs independently of each other while maintaining unity for larger threats or indeed for commerce and trade or mining. Mr. Ben.
What kind of numbers are we talking about in a single league? How many squats would be part of it? Population-wise.
If you assume tens of thousands in a given stronghold, we're looking at hundreds of thousands to millions in a league. Millions with an M. Yeah.
Right, okay. Right.
So they are...
Mimiums.
Percentage-wise, I suspect they're the same percentage as fantasy dwarves are to humans in Warhammer Fantasy. So there's, at a high view, they're a small percentage of the galactic kind of biomass, but there are millions upon millions of them in the galaxy map, as it were.
Yeah, okay. And they are diminishing in numbers. They're a dying race.
Well, we were just about to leap into that. They are now a dead race. So we move now on to so what was the point of that, Aaron?
It's a storm of chaos all over again.
So it is. Jesus. It genuinely is, because in the late second edition, they were removed from the game. Wow. So they did not receive a codex in the second edition, where many factions did. They were not one of the 10. They were included in the kind of get-you-by army lists for the second edition box set, but they were then removed completely from the game, or almost completely from the game, in the early 2000s. So it was the designer Jervis Johnson, who's one of the kind of head honchos at GW at the time.
Old Scurvy Jervy.
Old Scurvy Jervy. He, in a kind of blog post only done a few years ago, said that they dropped them because they could not get a clear identity of the culture within the 40K universe, because they were so tied to the structure of fantasy dwarves. So, as we've said, historically, when you draw over space elves, space orcs, and space dwarves, there's quite a big difference between space orcs and ordinary orcs, and the Eldari and the elves of Warhammer Fantasy. That's not the same for squats, for the dwarves. It's simply fantasy dwarves in space. They've retained the same cultural structure. They've retained the same aesthetic. which is kind of this Norse Celtic-y style aesthetic that's associated with dwarves, because that's the source of all our own historical dwarf lore and was the source for Tolkien's dwarf lore.
It's
was
like
the Norse dwarves of the Norse myths.
I see the problem. There's just like an inherent challenge, isn't there? Trying to put dwarves, whether you're acquainted with the Games Workshop fantasy Warhammer dwarves, really, when you think of fantasy dwarves, whether it's Tolkien, Warhammer, whatever IP you're into, they're all that same template, aren't they? And they all really belong in fantasy. And it's hard to give them value in any other setting, and you know,
it's hard to take them seriously.
Exactly.
Yeah, they have the kind of earnest comedy value of fantasy dwarves, yeah.
And I don't want to, offend any, small people in the real world, but that's
hi there.
Hi, I think that's.
Could you imagine me in space? I mean,
I often do, Val.
I often do. Yeah, sometimes with a spacesuit.
Sometimes butt naked,
but mainly
that's
with
fine.
not.
But to be honest, I do feel the same about 40k orcs. Like, orcs are uggy, thuggy, Neanderthal-like, technologically incompetent. Well, they're not, are they? Apparently they're not. They're better than dwarves, apparently. They're still there.
But they are similar in that they are kind of the only, like, it's a very serious setting, isn't it? And the orcs kind of run, in the opposite direction of that, which I think just having one of those is fine. We allow
enough.
But because it's just cannon fodder for all the other races. But to have a kind of comical, good in inverted commas race is a difficult one to see how that fits in. Right?
I absolutely take the point about the orcs, but I think the big difference is the orcs had a champion within the company, which was the owner of the company, Brian Ansell. At the time. He was the one. That's why the orcs have so much more lore in the early
because he fucking loves orcs.
Yeah, because there were something like 3 or 4 orc-centric books produced. No, there's 3 that, and one was just lore. One had no game rules in it at all, and it was just lore. Yeah,
that's mad.
Nonetheless, it worked, and people love
and it worked.
40k orcs. Yeah,
I think that's just the force of kind of inertia. The design inertia. There was so much done for orcs that they couldn't not keep it going. Yeah.
Too big to fail. Yeah.
This is not to say that they did not try. They definitely did, because squats had a huge role to play in the 2nd edition of Epic. Do you know, the teeny tiny 6 mil?
Fucking hell! Minis. How small were those minis? Like 2 mil.
And so you had a complete roster of squat minis that were, I mean, all joking aside, they were about somewhere between 4.5 mil, around 4.5 mil tall.
God, they sound frustrating to paint.
Yeah. It's just 2 blobs.
Yeah.
Yeah. You had the standard squat warriors, you had berserkers, you had the heavy weapons troops, the bikers and the trike riders were there in force, as were the access to robots, and you had the various characters that you could have on as your general or standard bearers or what have you. And indeed, you also had a huge kind of array of the larger kind of tanks, weapons, and aircraft. And so again, with this largely audio medium, I'm going to share another image.
We're getting very visual on this podcast.
It's very visual episode. It's just because I really like the vibe. So that there is a page from one of the Titan Legion books, or the Titan Legion books. So everything in the kind of top, well, everything on that page except for the Eldari stuff in the bottom left corner is squats. So they had squat airships and gyrocopters.
Zeppelins.
Yeah, so again,
Cool.
tying back to the fantasy dwarves, which have the only air force in fantasy, you have the various kind of artillery, the mega cannon and the fire cannon. You then had these huge armored vehicles, the Colossus and the Cyclops. Now, the Cyclops was just Titan weapons on tracks, and the Colossus served as a kind of mobile command and control fire base. And then right down at the very bottom, you'll see this kind of red train-like thing. That was the SWAT land train. So they had their own kind of Thomas the Tank Engine style destruction. But these things were huge because land trains were actually mentioned in the Rogue Trader rulebook, and they were not so much a vehicle as a battlefield. You could fight battles on the back of one of these huge armored vehicles as it goes through kind of the world,
the countryside,
with their kind of trading caravans, that kind of idea. Yeah.
So cool.
It's not like they just did a handful of miniatures and then called it quits. They did try to expand the range. They tested the waters with Epic, but they couldn't really get any purchase in terms of a clearer identity. And so it was decided that the squats were better to be gone than with it. You know, we can't do them justice, so we'll just get rid of them. So they were hoovered, I say, by the Tyranids.
Bring in the Tyranids.
And so the Tyranids
Operation Cleanup Squats. Yep.
Almost all of the squat homeworlds, leaving only a few scattered remnants and survivors.
Just a little appetizer before they got to the Imperium proper.
And so that ended the squats in Warhammer 40K, and they weren't mentioned again until the 6th edition. Mr. Ben?
Did the Tyranids create a Tyranid off the back of the squat DNA?
This is how little thought they gave to the destruction of the squats. They were never mentioned. No. It was literally a throwaway line that the squat worlds were devastated by the Tyranids. I like to think they did, but I you know, maybe it's just regular Tyranids that seem further away than they are.
Yeah, perspective warping Tyranids.
Yeah.
Bearded Tyranids. My God, we figured it out.
Yes.
Love it.
Beardy nids.
Beardy nids.
That does sound like a sex move. I received the bearded nid last night. Yeah.
Bearded nid.
And then I gave her the bearded nid. All right.
Have you seen the trend recently in the States of hairy fingernails?
No.
Ugh.
People putting little weaves full of hair on their nails so they have hairy nails.
What the fuck?
That's creepy.
Instead of false nails. It's just...
That's upsetting.
Ugh. So squats then were removed. They were, just mentioned in lore in passing as this kind of a lonely squat living out a sad existence in some hive world or another, grumbling about the fate of their race. And they were not officially reintroduced in any property at all until the kind of mid-6th edition, where they were mentioned again as an abhuman subspecies recognized by the Imperium, and were referred to as the Demiurge. So they were classed as a minor Xenos race that were allied with the Tau. And this was an
major rebrand.
An attempt to revive the squat's original concept, but it didn't have any legs. They did create, I think, 1 or 2 spaceship models for use in the game Battlefleet Gothic, but it didn't really bite into the original.
Wasn't to be. Yeah,
I want little dwarves on the table, figures, rather than spaceships. Yeah.
Spoken like a true tyrannical king.
You did have a lot of people who had, squat miniatures or squat armies would play the games, but play as the Imperial Guard, as the Astra Militarum, using squat miniatures. And that's quite thematic because the squats would associate with the Imperial Guard under the kind of old lore. However, Games Workshop maintained that only official factions could be used in gameplay at the time. So even then, that stopped squats appearing in any kind of official tournament. And that kind of was the end of the squats until 2022. Where on April Fool's Day, they announced the squats would be returning as a fully playable faction, and no one believed them. Because it was April Fool's Day, and that was what they were trying to do, because on April the 2nd, they published the kind of first image of a new squat miniature and announced they would be returning as this new faction called the Leagues of Votann.
And everyone rolled their eyes. Not again.
Not again. So we find ourselves now into phase 3, the Leagues of Votann.
Third time's a charm.
So the lore of their founding remains largely the same. These were mining colonists sent out on generational starships into the galactic core. And so as an age of myth is their kind of founding age now, they were very kind of well-equipped mining concerns. So they were kind of corporatized mining generational ships that were sent out with an almost fully functional AI system aboard each one at the time. These AIs later became known as Votann, as in it is a Votann, the kind of collective name for these AI systems. And these AI systems still exist. They are the they're the kind of guiding cultural principle of the holds, as they've become to be the leagues themselves. So at the heart of each league, if you can imagine it as a vast mining company, each league has a Votann at its center. So it's guided by an AI system that not only remembers their heritage, but also can advise their leading councils. The Khals are they're now chieftains. That's they're kind of being rebranded, and so this kind of verboten AI system that the Imperium will purge at every turn is a closely guarded secret within the Votann leagues. Again, occupying the galactic core two tens of thousands of years ago, they followed the same sort of cultural history, guided by these ancestor cores. They began to mutate, and under the kind of immense pressures and radiations found in the galactic core, they've gone from being this kind of fantasy dwarf in space to being like a hard science Blade Runner style society in space, where the vast majority of the squats, the Votann, I suppose we should call them, are in fact clones. So they are clones called clone skeins. Initially started as a kind of genome altering program to enhance physical durability and strength, to give them this kind of optimal body form to exist in the high gravity and pressures of the galactic core, and also give them a chance to survive the mining experiences that they're going to go through. What's the name of that game? Is it the ones where it's the dwarves in space mining?
Deep Rock Galactic.
Deep Rock Galactic. That's the one.
It's that, if you can imagine that, but more professional.
Okay.
So over time, the living population of the Votann homeworlds changed from natural-born descendants of original colonists to a clone race. Now, this is not just a rubber-stamped clone race. They take specific needed aspects and put them in. So there's a great variety of Votann warriors and living beings. Such is their skill at this cloning process that they are able to deliberately imbue a given Votann with a psychic power, with psychic capacity, so they can manipulate warp energy. But again, it's a very kind of dwarfy take on the manipulation of the warp energy. And indeed, it's these individuals called Grimnir who are referred to as living ancestors. So we see straight away they're tying... They've used the original lore as a starting point and then edited it to make it more kind of hard science.
Added robots.
So, added AI. Added lots of AI, but also have in fact added robots, because the clone schemes make up one of the two cultural groups within the Leagues of Votann, the other being the Ironkin, who are AI, who are robots within, as we would understand them. These are robots that have distinct personalities, have in some cases ambitions, who want more for themselves than just simply being robots. And
feelings. Do they have feelings?
They have, broadly, yes, because they do interact with the living Votann on a daily basis. And in fact, they effectively look like Votann, but they have a helmet on all the time, which is kind of one of these ones which is just... the head would stop at the eyes, but it's a dome, if you see what I mean. Right, just a dome on top of where the head would be.
Are they close? Like, do the Votann treat the Ironkin as their own? Like, do they have a good
Yes, because the Ironkin, the personalities of the Ironkin are created by the Votann AI, by the ancestors. So they are very much part of a given league or a given hold. They still have holds. So they're viewed as members of their extended family and treated as such. And in fact, there are expectations placed on the Ironkin, as there would be on other Votann. And so on the tabletop, you can actually field units of Ironkin warriors, which is effectively it's the same plastic kit as as the Votann warriors, but just with that helmet, the different helmet on.
Okay. Are they the same size?
Same size, yeah.
Okay. I am very quickly coming round to the idea of the Leagues of Votann. This is fucking cool. I love the idea that the AI is the kind of leading head of the...
Yes, it's the guiding. It's the soul of the given league. The leaders of those leagues, the physical leaders, the Votann leaders, still make the broad decisions. Mr. Chris.
So the Leagues of Votann in their current form, they are Xenos. They are not abhuman anymore, and they are allies with the Tau.
No, that was the demiurge. That was the spaceship. Yes. So they are technically human because that's their source genome.
Okay.
But they are a distinct abhuman style, and the Imperium views them as abhuman, although there are as many Space Marine chapters that would want to purge them from the galaxy as filthy Xenos as there would be Space Marine chapters that view them as abhumans and maybe useful as part of the Imperium, that kind of thing. So, as I say, they have this huge physical resilience. This resilience extends to protection against the warp. They have a very small candle, no pun intended, of their souls project a very small amount of light in the warp as compared to a human soul. And so thus that protects them largely from the corrupting influences of warp and the chaos, or the forces of chaos. They have staggering amounts of technology. I think we discussed during the Tau episode that ion weapons that the Tau used came from trades with the Votann.
Wow.
Well, they have Votann-centric versions of most weapons available to the members of the Imperium. So plasma guns, fusion guns, meltaguns, sorry, bolt rifles or bolt revolvers, as they're used. They're hand-to-hand weaponry. It's quite amusing because they have something called plasma axes, which is an acetylene torch, but a huge axe blade.
But an axe. Amazing.
Used by what's referred to as the berserkers, who are dwarf slayers.
Oh, cool.
So they're still keeping that kind of cultural touchstone going.
Do they have two axes?
Some of them have two axes. Some of them have two thunder fists. So it's two big power fists to rage into battle.
Amazing.
It's really their kind of larger mining and harvesting equipment that kind of beggars belief. They have harvest ships that can take in an entire moon and grind it down into its constituent resources for their manufacturing process or for trade. They very much like the Catan, they're able to drain off energy from stars and use that again to fuel their industry and their society. They have huge numbers within the galactic core that are all a network largely of allied strongholds. So very much taking back to what the squats were. Individual holds would gather together with other local holds for defense and trade, and then these coalesced into the larger leagues of Votann, where you'd have tens, if not hundreds, of holds in an individual league. They've established extensive trade routes throughout the kind of galactic core and the surrounding kind of systems that have allowed them to trade and share resources and defensive capacities amongst themselves. So again, keeping that kind of core idea of us against them and trade, that kind of thing, while maintaining their own independence. They're unbelievably wealthy simply because of the sheer numbers of resources available to them. They've not even made a dent in, they've not even harvested 1% of 1% of all the resources that are available to them.
So cool.
Famous last words. We'll never run out of resources. Keep mining.
Yeah, guys, we've run out. So, we didn't see it coming. We did not see it coming.
It's all right. They'll get rid of us in 10th edition anyway, so that's fine.
Yeah. Turns out that mining whole moons in one go can't do it for long, guys. We cannot do it for long. When did the Imperium, in the lore, become aware of them?
This will have been a handful of thousands of years ago, but the Imperium, of course, is eager for any kind of human, even abhumans, to be brought back into the fold. The Votann, understanding what would happen to their culture if the Mechanicus or the Adeptus Terra, even became aware of these AI and their Ironkin fellows, warriors, hold the Imperium at arm's length. They are more acquaintances now than allies, though there are still opportunities for trade is still a big driving force for them.
So one last question on that, does the Imperium, when the Imperium see the Ironkin on the battlefield, do they just think that that's a Votann with the helmet on?
Yeah.
Right. Clever.
So the Great Rift has occurred, and obviously that's altered the landscape, in quotes, of the galactic core. And so many strongholds or holds have had to relocate because their home is now a demon world. And this has reignited kind of old grudges, we'll call it, and introduced them to new foes of basically chaos forces. And so they've now had to expand out from the galactic core slightly to be able to continue their existence, which meant they've come into conflict with the Imperium and the Eldari and the Orcs and the Tau and as they're making attempts to adapt to these kind of new landscapes and new challenges. They now have face an unprecedented level of interaction with outsiders. So again, we're drawing on that idea that they were a race in isolation and now they're back out, but they're very, very wary about anything changing their society as such.
So are they all clones?
Yes. Now
like
they
Boba
are
Fett
by far.
style. So they all look exactly the same.
No, literally said that. Yeah,
there's loads of different types.
Yes, they're very careful, or the Votann AIs are very careful to ensure that there is still a healthy amount of diversity in the genome, because it kind of makes their culture far hardier than if it was just all one. Because one disease that would infect one specific type of clone only affects that type of clone rather than wiping out their entire culture.
Got it, yeah.
So when you say that the AI is very careful in terms of kind of spreading the genome, are there still Votann that are identical to other Votann? It's just that there's, 100 different types of them, or is everyone unique in the same way that you would find in a normal reproducing race?
There are hundreds of thousands of different forms of clone,
right? Okay,
per stronghold. So there's per stronghold. So it's not really, you're still an individual,
right? But you could meet somebody who looked exactly like you. Is that a possibility?
Well, yeah, you could. Yeah.
Wow, holy shit! And
the
do they still procreate in a normal way as well, or is it that not the case anymore?
I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that question.
They haven't said anything about that. Right. Okay.
They just are.
Oh.
Yeah, the Votann, you can definitely take them more seriously. They've got a much more cooler aesthetic, serious aesthetic compared to the other ones, definitely.
Squats.
Yeah, in terms of their...
It's amazing what a talented bit of artistry can do, isn't it?
Yeah. But also, they as the hard science kind of idea still kicks in. So that there is a kind of surveying tank.
That's cool.
Which, that looks like it looks like an underwater submarine strapped to some tank tracks. So that's like a prospector unit. And it is. But that's not to say they've abandoned all things kind of comical, because they do have an updated version of a certain eggy shaped unit. So they are still exosuits, but they do look a bit more badass rather than an angry cream egg.
Look like Ben's favorite. Who's the big robot off Ben's favorite game, BioShock?
Oh, the Big Daddy.
The Big Daddy.
Big Daddy.
Yeah, that's a good show, man. Yeah. That's a bit the Big Daddy-ish.
So in terms of what you can field on the board, they have an array of kind of leaders. So you've got your Khals, who are the generals, and then your Thanes, who are the kind of champions or local heroes. You do have the engineers, who appear as the Brokir Iron Masters, And these are the ones who control the large auto foundries where all the vehicles and the weapons and the goods are produced. And I think in one of those images you saw, it's the portrait image, you saw a kind of auto foundry in production. The living ancestors, the Grimnir, are the Votann who are blessed with psychic powers from a kind of rare clone scheme, or a rare kind of clone template. And there's only a handful of them existing at any given time within a league, if at all.
Is that the dude in that image? The one who looks like a kind of druid?
Yes.
Yeah, so they're not clad in armor or anything. They're like wizards. They're like psychers.
And what's interesting about that is that they're associated with two kind of hovering ironkin called Corv units. So they're Grimnir, which is another name for Odin in the Norse myths, and he's associated with two kind of ravens who are the ironkin.
Oh, cool!
Around them. So again, a huge, strong presence of kind of Norse culture, which was the kind of, as I said, the founding culture for Tolkienian dwarves.
Love it.
The Hearthguard are there, and they are in huge exo armor, not egg exo armor, but you can get them in. They're kind of elite bodyguards and champions of the Leagues of Votann. You've got the Hearthkin warriors, who are the bog standard squat warriors, the Votann warriors. You've got the Ironkin, who they fulfill the same sort of role. You've got the Hernkin, who are the scouts and rangers, and of note are kind of two versions of that. One are the pioneers, who are effectively the updated version of the guild bikers, but it's only hover trikes. It's like hovering trikes with the weapons on the back, and you can feel them in squads. And then you've got the Jaeger, who are the commandos. The
Jägermeister.
Oh god, yeah. I'd rather touch a spider, mate.
Remember when I used to work in bars, and if you ever came in ill, they were like, right, give him a shot of Jägermeister, because they seemed to think that because it was herbal, it would somehow help. Pretty certain the alcohol did the opposite thing myself, but a few of them and you could work. You know,
oh yeah, you could get some work.
Oh, you could work.
So the Jaeger are great on the tabletop because they are relatively fast-moving dwarf commandos.
Very brave.
But you could actually. It's one of the kill teams I'm interested in because you can actually play them in kill team.
Oh, cool.
You then get the Brokir Thunderkin. Now these are junior engineers, so junior guild people who are strapped into exo frames, but it does look like they're walking with robotic stilts.
So hobbling, kind of constantly moving to keep balance.
Yeah, with some sort of comedy theme tune in the background.
Yeah.
And when they fall over, they make that really small plinking noise. Blink. I believe just from looking at it, it gives them, they're able to get over more kind of difficult terrain.
Confidence.
But they're also able to carry larger weapons that hang down a bit more.
Okay.
That is a fucking big weapon, isn't it? Is that a flamethrower or something?
No, I believe that's like a Tesla cannon.
Right, okay.
Yeah, it's like a lightning cannon. Oh, hang on. No, it's a bit plasma-y, I think.
Something about Aliens 3? No, Aliens 2 about that. The big exosuit that she wears.
It's a power loader.
The power loader, Kral. 2 points to Kral for his alien lore guess.
I tell you, that does sound like a sex thing.
And then I gave her the power loader. Yeah.
and I gave her the old tartan iron skin, and then I left.
Along with the Rune of Doom, it's more of a wrestling move.
Yeah, that's true.
The power loader into the Rune of Doom. Do they have magic runes? Are runes a thing for squats?
No.
Not really.
No.
The technology's their jam.
Yeah. Those are the kind of heavy weapon engineers of the Votann. The Hearthkin salvagers are kind of day-to-day scouts. They're like the prospectors of the Votann culture, and they're largely just the same as the Hearthkin warriors, just a different, more kind of close combat-y and somehow snipery at the same time. In terms of staggeringly effective close combat, they do have something called the Chthonian Berserks. And I'm just sharing an image there. These are the dwarf slayers of the Leagues of Votann.
Cool.
Yeah, they are.
You can see
Everybody's
them with their
favourite.
plasma axes, and
Plaxes.
the fists, the double fister.
What's going on the two bases at the top?
Not a lot.
Yeah, those are dead ones. It's a vaporized Votann Slayer.
You have to pay extra for those.
Yeah, it's just a pair of boots.
The one thing I will say is, if you look at the bigger base in the bottom left, the guy at the front with the gun is followed by an ironkin. So that's what an ironkin looks like.
Right.
With a bindle sack. Looks like a homeless hobo.
Yes. Carrying an axe.
And the gun there is actually a subterranean mortar. So it fires grenades that have drills at the front that kind of tunnel under and then come up and explode.
Oh, cool.
A mortar underground. Doesn't sound too smart.
It doesn't sound safe, man.
Well, the origins of that weapon are back in the very first edition of 40k. It's a mole mortar, which was,
cool.
It looked like a mortar, but the top end was closed and it just fired these drilling warheads towards the enemy. Yeah, pretty good.
That's wicked.
Down or
down?
Mortars. Right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Got it. So you have to be above the enemy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or you just
it would either detonate. It would detonate underneath the enemy and so cause them to collapse.
Cool.
Or it would burst up through the ground into the air and then detonate.
Amazing.
It was mining equipment repurposed for war.
Got it.
Are these do these guys have the same kind of backstory as Slayers? Is it a kind of a shame based kind of jam, or are they just nuts?
I'm going to draw a veil here on this one because it's so cool. We're going to wait until we actually do a bit of a deep dive on them.
Excellent. Love it. little teaser there. Excellent stuff.
So in terms of their vehicles, we've discussed the trikes. They've now, Games Workshop has recently, for the Necromunda game, released bikers. Finally. They have the usual troop carrying a armored personnel carrier called the Sagittor, and it looks like a piece of heavy industrial mining equipment repurposed for war. And then they've got the Hecaton land fortress, which is their kind of equivalent of a main battle tank. But they all look like Hecaton, yeah. They all look like exploration vehicles from like Aliens, the Alien movies.
Yeah.
So like from Prometheus.
Like buggy wheels.
Yes, that kind of idea.
Yeah.
So again, it's the hard science, it's the mining aesthetic, the industrial aesthetic that's
cool.
been brought to bear. But yeah, so that is Votann.
They're cool.
Votann.
Yes.
I struggle to love them as much as fantasy dwarves, and I think that's inherent throughout their story of 40k, isn't it? Really, like you want to love them.
There's something slightly off, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to go in the opposite direction. I think I prefer them to fantasy dwarves.
Oh,
like I think they've done I think Games Workshop have done a really good job of like Kral said, like making them more serious. I
Yes.
can
The
take those
Votann, Leagues of
seriously.
Votann, yeah, I don't not like them as much as the OG squats and demiurge and stuff. Maybe
Yeah,
it's just
like,
because the
it's-
artwork looks badasseria.
Yeah, but I also love the fact that they're kind of running counter to the Imperium's idea of, you know, robots and AI. What's the Imperium stance on clones? I'm guessing they're okay with that, given that they've made a lot of them themselves.
Yes, you're going to take that on a clone by clone basis.
Clone by
but
clone basis.
yeah, because if you recall from the Necromunda episode, the House Goliath, the big hulking guys,
Oh yeah.
they're all clones, or rather, the vast majority of them are clones.
Okay, right. But yeah, I love the AI at the core of their culture, sort of thing. That's really interesting, and they're and again, them being kind of like a smaller faction, but just heavily technologied, kind of like the Tau, gives them that little balancing advantage, doesn't it?
Well, I mean, I'll throw one last image up, which is taken from the Epic game as was. So you've seen now what they've become. I don't know. I still kind of like aspects of who they were, and mostly because they were
It's
just
hilarious.
It is hilarious. So there is that squats fighting orcs, and in the back you see a land train crashing into a Gargant.
Oh yeah.
So we've gone from that to Blade Runner. Yeah,
I love that the guy at the front with the axe is basically wearing a modified Chesterfield sofa.
Yeah.
Oh mate, that's not modified.
He's wearing a sofa.
It's
an angry tiny sofa. Yeah.
The old artwork is basically he's basically wearing studded armor, isn't he? Same in like a fantasy.
Yeah.
He looks very fantasy like. Very fantasy like. And it's only in the Leagues of Votann where they actually like, okay, this is
serious.
This is space ready. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You wouldn't want to take that into space. It's not going to be a huge amount of no breathing apparatus.
Breathing.
I think the big thing they've done, as far as I can tell, is they've reflected the context of their cultural history in the development of the faction.
Nice,
so they actually look like a race that are miners, that are working heavy industry and have the associated equipment required to go prospecting on all these planets. And they do send out prospecting fleets to go out and find planets that are heavy in the resources they need, or indeed to uncover older or newer planets for habitation.
Cool.
And so in Necromunda, there is a squat. There's a large squat presence on the planet in the form of these prospectors. These are dwarf miners who form gangs rather than dwarf soldiers or Votann soldiers or Votann warriors,
right?
As such. So it's more, you get more of the industrial exploration kind of idea of the Votann from the game Necromunda, or from their appearance in Necromunda. And with that, lads, I'm drawing not only this episode to a close, but the entire introduction.
Yes.
That's it.
Can we actually...
Only 32 episodes. Fucking hell.
Some serious content from now on.
Yeah. Let's get serious.
Can we get some structure on this?
Some meaningful content, please.
So, now that you've been given a rough introduction to the lore of 40K, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm not interested.
I've just been going through the motions, Aaron, for the past 5 episodes.
I was trying to find an appropriate exit point, and it seems like this is it. So,
goodbye.
Like Duncan Ballantyne, I'm out. No, it's just, I mean, it's epic, isn't it? There's no, I've never come across, not literally or literally, any story anywhere else that is as detailed and kind of engrossing and weirdly relatable in some
Arousing.
way.
Yeah.
Like because arousing, yeah. Because like whatever, if you like the idea of 40K, there is at least one faction in there that will resonate with you because it's so.
Oh yeah.
Well,
there'll be one that will resonate with you, and one that you like that you didn't think you would like.
Yes, like
Sure.
the Votann.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm not going to be into this, but then you were like, yeah, and they're awesome, and I was like, oh, yeah, no, they are awesome. Yeah, I agree. Like, yeah.
But you can kind of tell that there's been 30 years of development on it, can't you? It's grown.
Yeah.
Quite significantly.
Grant, what are your thoughts on 40K now? Because I know that when we started this, you were I'm not sure that you were particularly taken with the sci-fi approach, because we were having a really good time with the fantasy show at up to that point. And then
still are, aren't we, Ben?
We still are. I mean, it's but
what are you saying?
It's kind of gone downhill from there. But but like, what do you think now? Because I feel like at the end of episodes 2 and 3, when we were looking at the lore development through the editions, I was looking at your camera thinking, he's gonna walk.
We've
There's
lost
no
him.
way.
We've lost him.
There's no way. But here we are.
Who else can we get to co-host this show? Yeah, 32 episodes in, and I'm still here. Yeah, so I was a bit concerned that it was going to be a bit too expensive for me, and now I'm petrified. So it's been. Yeah, I mean, no surprise. It's been really quite revealing. I had an idea, a very naive idea of Warhammer 40K. I think, like most people who aren't educated and into it, I just thought it was, and to a large degree it still is, just the humans, oppressive humans. Yep, Space Marines mainly. Shooty. Yeah, there's it's overwhelming, as I think you can tell. I'm struggling to get the words out.
He's choking on his own awe.
Really.
Is that what that's called?
Chaos, the Emperor, Custodes, Votann. I mean, blimey. Yeah. Like,
so can we sign you up for another 32 episodes? Can we extend your contract?
Yes,
I think that's
I'm in for the long run. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
sweet. Do we know where? Well, hold on. Do you know where we're going next?
Yes, I think rather than launching into a deep dive of a given faction and then continuing that process, what I thought we'd do, because there is by far so much more content for the 40K game than there ever was, and perhaps will be, for Warhammer Fantasy. We've an opportunity to kind of, instead of just going faction to faction to faction, we can go faction, or we can intermix factions and campaigns, where there are kind of details on the narratives of how each of these factions fight in a given narrative structure that will give, I think, a lot of insight into how these factions expand, and perhaps even how these factions play within the game. And so obviously, the Horus Heresy is perhaps a thing that we won't cover directly, because it is its own 425 episode podcast to do it any form of justice.
And but I know that given that specific episode number, you've already mapped it out and calculated that, haven't you?
I would be lying if I said I hadn't. But there is a Imperial Civil War that was one of the first mentions of a civil war within the Imperium in the entire game line, and that will give us insight into the Astartes, into the Astra Militarum, the navies, the Inquisition, and elements of chaos, and the brutality of the Imperium in a more detailed and enjoyable, family-friendly structure. And that is, of course, the Badab War, which was one of
Badabab.
Graal is referencing a famous drum and bass song.
Well, we've got the intro music for it sorted.
Ba-da-dun, ba-da-dun, ba-da-dun.
So I thought we do,
Badabab.
we do a view on the entire Badab War campaign, which included 17 chapters of Space Marines, innumerable regiments of the Astra Militarum, the Inquisition, and ostensibly Chaos, Corruption, and Heresy. So
Nice.
it will be an Imperium-centric
Full.
campaign, but we will touch on other races as we go through it.
We're going to mix up race deep dives and campaigns then going forward.
Yes.
To keep it fresh.
So
freaky fresh.
we will, the Badab War campaign will set up the first deep dive, which will be the kind of generic Space Marines, a Space Marine chapter as such, and we'll dive into that, and then we'll go on then to another campaign, which will lead on to another faction, and. Yeah.
Wonderful. I can't wait. And we will
Wunderbar.
have other discussions about the possibly upcoming Horus Heresy series, because that's 425 episodes I need in my life. But that's a conversation for another day.
Hang on. I thought we were doing laying down the lore Skyrim next, Ben.
We've all experienced my narration capabilities. And that is no hook to hang a podcast on. So I'm afraid. Anyway, I need to wrap up. We need to wrap up.
Yeah.
All right, that's all from us. Thank you so much for listening. Details and imagery for the topics we've discussed in this podcast can be found on our website at layingdownthelore.com. We also have all our previous episodes on there, release schedules and merchandise. Again, if you're keen to support the show, just click on the Quartermaster link in the description and give us all of your Votann Ironkin gold chunks.
Gold chunks.
I was going with a mining theme there. Anyway,
Nuggets.
Okay. Nuggets. Give us all of your Votann nuggets. We'll be back again soon displaying just how much Chris now loves 40k. Until then,
Yay.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Blah, 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 blah.